Hello and welcome to the monthly Central U.S. Climate Outlook. My name is John Eyes and I'm with the National Weather Service, Central Region Headquarters in Kansas City. I will be today's moderator. Before we begin our introduction, I have muted everyone's line so everyone may enjoy the full benefit of the call without any background noise. Thank you. When we do get the questions, once Brian is done with his briefing today, just use *6 to unmute your line, and that'll open it up so you can ask your question. And then when you're done, *6 to mute again. Our speaker today is Brian Fuchs. He is with the National Drought Mitigation Center at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Brian. Brian?
All right, thank you, John, and thank you everyone who've taken the time to tune in today. I'm going to be the presenter for the webinar, and like John said, we'll go through everything, and please keep track of any questions that you may have, and we will address all questions at the very end. Again, my name is Brian Fuchs. I am a climatologist with the National Drought Mitigation Center and also part of the newly formed Drought Risk Management Research Center, and this is all housed at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. So on my front slide, I think the one photo I do have included does set the tone for a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, and this is a flooded out soybean field in northwestern parts of Indiana from earlier this month. So keep that in mind as we go forward. Okay, advance. Okay, general information about these calls. It's a very collaborative effort between many, and I'm not going to go through everyone's names. They're listed there for you. The next webinar is slated for August 20th, 2015, and I think the presenter for that one is going to be Jim Angel from the Illinois State Climate Office. These are all being archived, and you can get to that information down below, and information on future webinars is provided in the link. An update for a special webinar that will be taking place here at the end of July. This webinar is going to be talking about El Nino specifically and some of the impacts as we go towards winter and into spring, basically making everyone aware in the region of where we're at with El Nino at that point in time and what can be anticipated. And This webinar is still coming together, so there could be some other topics which will be discussed, so stay tuned for that. Information on how to sign up to participate in that webinar is available in the link up above. So our agenda for today, going to look at the current conditions for the region as a whole, specifically looking at a few key points, some regional climate updates, what's going on due to the types of conditions that we have seen. And then the outlooks, new release of all the products by CPC today, so we'll spend some time at the end going over that. And for those of you who have experienced this, the graphic below does a good job of showing some of what we've seen here in the region over the last several months. And these fires up in Alaska and in the northern parts of Canada have been bringing down with them, anytime we have a northerly fetch to the wind, quite a bit of smoke with them, and up to the point that you can actually smell the smoke, and it is noticeable in the skies when we do have the impact from it. So this satellite shot was just a really good depiction of that. Everything within the red circle is not clouds. I guess there are some clouds in Canada, but for the most part, that is all smoke. So current conditions, again, we're going to be talking about the wetness, and again, just some images of what some of the challenges have been for producers, especially in the region, in both May and June during this current growing season. So to start off with temperatures, and continue with the trend that we'd seen through much of the spring and into the first part of summer over the last 30 days, much of the Midwest, and including the Great Lakes regions, were well below normal for their temperatures for this time of year. And then as you progress further to the west, that does change quite rapidly, especially as you get to the west of the Missouri River. And also in the southern reaches of the region, you do see that above normal temperatures were quite prevalent. The real hot temperatures, of course, are the further you go to the west. They have experienced the brunt of the heat this year as far as the country goes. And with the June update of the state of the climate report from NCDC, NCEI, I guess is their new name, we can see that for June in our region, pretty benign, and we actually had some below average temperatures in the state of Michigan through the month of June. And as we went further west, we did see some of those states like Nebraska, South Dakota, Kansas, even into Colorado, where temperatures were quite a bit above normal. But for the most part, the Midwest to Central Plains were near average to just slightly above average, compared to, again, the contrast out in the western U.S. and even down in the southeast in the month of June with some of the heat they'd been experiencing. Many states out west, I think there was 5 of them this last June that set their all-time record warmest June for their 121 years of record. And looking at precipitation, again, along with those cooler temperatures, it's not surprising that precipitation was higher in many states during this month. The clouds associated with those precipitation events definitely did help to bring those temperatures down. And we saw that Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio had their wettest Junes on record, again, 121 years of record. And Missouri wasn't too far behind. Even Iowa and Nebraska were showing above normal. But some of that rain fell very early in the month, especially in places like Nebraska, where it has dried out over the last 30 days or so. And this wasn't just confined to the Midwest. As you look towards the Mid-Atlantic into the New England, again, it was quite wet through those states as well. So looking at the 30-day precipitation, I have the percent of normal in the upper right-hand portion of the panel and the departure from normal in the lower left-hand panel. So you can definitely see some pockets that over the last 30 days have been dry, and I'm really focusing my eyes on northwest Iowa to southwest Iowa, down into western Kansas, southwestern Nebraska. And some of these same areas did not pick up the heavier rains back in the spring that some adjoining areas did. And so when we look at the departures, it doesn't look that great with maybe only 3 inches below normal for the month or for the last 30 days, but that is building on top of some deficits that already existed. As we look into portions of Illinois, Missouri, Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, we can see that anywhere from 200 to 300% of normal precipitation for the month of June. Looking at the departures down below, we're seeing anything from 9 to 12 inches above normal. Excuse me, that just wasn't for June, but the last 30 days, 9 to 12 inches above normal. And the problems associated with this is a lot of this rain has come in very high intensity types of events, and also on top of a wet May into the first part of June for many of these regions. For agricultural producers, it was quite evident that there was delays taking place, and especially those on double cropped fields getting soybeans in after for this season was definitely a challenge, as not only was there standing water, but just getting equipment into the fields was a challenge, and that was all the way through the grain belt. We'd seen those types of delays, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more as we progress. So looking at the last 90 days, again, percent of normal in the upper right, departure from normal in the lower left. Focusing just on the percent of normal, we can see that from the Four Corners region through the western areas of South Dakota, Nebraska, eastern Colorado, most of Wyoming, and then also down into Missouri, Oklahoma, into Illinois, Indiana, and parts of Ohio and southern Michigan. Definitely over the last 90 days it has been wet. But then again, I look across those areas of southern Wisconsin, northern Iowa, down into northeast Nebraska to central Nebraska, and parts of southern South Dakota, and then parts of North Dakota as well. There have been some pockets of dryness in there that over the last 90 days, where it seems like everyone around you is picking up precipitation, these areas are anywhere from 3 to 6 inches below normal, and realistically that area of northwest Iowa has been one of the driest areas over the last 90 days in all of the regions. So some areas that we are still watching. I know there had been some discussion on how to appropriately show this on the drought monitor, and I'll talk about that as we get closer to that analysis. So just looking at the last 3 months, the April through June climate, we can see, again, we have precipitation on the upper part of the panel and temperatures on the lower part. And so we'll address temperatures right away. That for the most part, the region was anywhere near average to a little bit above average. Ohio, Kentucky, and part of the eastern stretches were a little bit warmer during the last 3 months, but a lot of that came in portions of April and May, as we'd seen. Precipitation, it's phenomenal to see what Texas has done after 5 years of drought. All of a sudden, they've had their record wettest April through June, and less than 1% of the state is showing any drought now, and Oklahoma is right behind them. But as you get into the Midwest, April through June, that's crucial agricultural season, planting season, and again, the delays that we'd seen, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio really stand out as far as where their rankings were. Out of 121 years, they were anywhere from 116th to 118th wettest, respectively. Nebraska and Kansas, and Kansas is quite unique too, that the eastern divisions really skew those numbers, because as we'd seen on some of the earlier products, the western reaches were not as wet. So overall through the region, we don't see anything really standing out that had any indication of dryness over the last 3 months. And looking at this from year to date, we have the precipitation numbers, percent of normal again, upper right, departure on the lower left. And we can see that the lingering impact of the dry winter that we had been talking about back in February and March, we're still seeing that on some of the statistics, where anywhere from 70 to 90% of normal precipitation from central Nebraska to northeast Nebraska, north central Kansas to western Kansas, eastern South Dakota, a lot of northern Iowa into southern Minnesota, into Wisconsin, and even Michigan. There is some areas that, based on how dry the winter was and into the first part of spring, have not fully recovered. But the deficits, again, are anywhere from 3 to 6 inches through a lot of these regions. So for the calendar year, yeah, a lot of places are off. But again, coupled with cooler than normal temperatures through a lot of that same area, and the timeliness of some of these precipitation events, it has not been too much issue. And we've also heard that in some of these areas, the way the rains have come has caused more problem than seeing the time in between these rains with the deficits occurring. And again, looking at temperatures, we do see this delineation from east to west. As you go further west, definitely seeing the departures from normal becoming more positive compared to the below normal temperatures. And realistically, if you look at the eastern border of North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, and Kansas, anywhere east of that line, pretty much we're seeing below normal temperatures so far in 2015, with departures in Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan reaching anywhere from 4 to 5 degrees below normal. Whereas you go west in those regions, those transition zones between the Dakotas and Nebraska and Kansas are kind of speckled, with some areas above and some below. But as you hit Wyoming, Montana, Colorado, the temperatures definitely have been well above normal for 2015 up to this point. And like the likelihood of that continuing is fairly high right now. So what has the impact been to the stream flows in the region? What we're seeing is all the way from Texas up through Missouri and into the Midwest and into New England, most, if not all, gauges are reading at well above normal to record highs for this point in time. We are seeing that dryness along the Republican River in southwest Nebraska, as well as into north central Kansas. Those areas are reading below normal, even much below normal for this time of year. And again, that dry pocket up in northwest Iowa does start to stand out. But for the most part, that has been the only readings within the region that are below normal for this time of year. Looking at the Missouri River Basin as a whole, just really the same information, catching more of Montana right here. We can see that there are some areas of hydrological concerns as far as low flows in the region, and those areas in northwest Iowa do stand out. As we look at the upper Mississippi Basin, really no concerns for lack of stream flow in any of the basin, as everything is normal to much above normal. And as we get into the Ohio Basin, much of the same. And a lot of this has come over the last 30 to 60 days, that there definitely has been a switch in the climate regime as far as what we had been seeing as far as precipitation and frequency of precipitation events, and definitely the hydrological systems are showing this. As we go up into the Great Lakes, this is just a time series from 1978 through present for all the lakes. And what we're seeing is all of the lake levels right now are above normal. For each lake, the red line is the normal level. And then in the maroon-colored dots, it is showing somewhat of a forecast. So it is anticipating that the peaks have been reached on the Great Lakes for the year, and we'll probably start seeing a little bit lower levels going forward, but all of them are staying right at average. Ontario looks to dip a little bit below average as we go forward, but for the most part, the lakes are fine. Looking at water temperatures, Lake Superior again is going to have the coolest temperatures for this time of year, and definitely looking at some of the water temperatures as far as algae blooms on the lakes and the concerns associated with that. But for the most part, again, that cooler water is confined to the more northerly extent of the Great Lakes right now. So looking at soil moisture anomalies for this point in time, what we can see is, again, most of the region is in the white or the blue, which means that soil moisture is normal or slightly above normal as far as what the readings are according to the NLDAS model. But we can see in the area that I've highlighted in the red oblong from southwest Nebraska through central Nebraska all the way up into Minnesota, and even extending into some of those areas beyond where I highlighted, there are some pockets of dryness, and a lot of that is more so carryover from some of the dryness observed over the winter months. And as we came out of winter into spring, some of those areas were quite dry. You can see just the sharp contrast in Nebraska, for example, between the Panhandle, the central part of the state, and the southeast part of the state. You can see that some of those areas just have not picked up on those same rains as other areas have, and that is continuous through eastern South Dakota into Minnesota, northwest Iowa. So something to keep an eye on as we go forward. If we continue to miss out on timely rains or even near normal rains, what will the impact be to soils, especially for the agricultural sector? As we already are in the middle of July, even with some of the planting delays, as we start seeing pollination taking place, it's going to become more important to monitor stress on the corn crop, and later on at the beginning of August, what the soybean crop will be under, what kind of stress they could potentially see. So looking at this at a state-by-state reading, this is from the weekly NASS reports. If you look at the very short columns, the top is topsoil, the bottom is subsoil moisture. We can really see that there's not too many places that are reporting major issues with soil moisture. We are seeing that in some of those areas, such as Kansas and Nebraska, the Dakotas, Wisconsin, even Wyoming, Colorado, that the numbers for short are greater than what we're seeing in other areas. But we also can see on the flip side in Ohio and Indiana, even Illinois, some of the surpluses that are being observed. And again, a lot of that has just come in the last 30 days or so. As we go into the bottom part of these numbers, looking at the, I need to go back, hit the wrong button. Okay, as we go and look at subsoil moisture, again, there's not too much of an issue. Most areas are showing adequate to surplus subsoil moisture as well. But when we start looking at the very short, Kansas stands out, Nebraska, South Dakota, and these are some of those pockets of dryness that were showing up on the NLDAS soil moisture model as well as on the precipitation statistics that just are not picking up as much rain as their neighbors, even though the deficits and the impact from that dryness has not been too great up to this point. Looking at growing degrees, again, during the agricultural season, growing degree units are so important on tracking the progression of the crop, especially in a year where many producers were late getting some of their crops in, or even well behind where they typically are as far as putting seed in the ground, and what does that mean as far as potential developmental issues moving forward. So this is the base 50 growing degree days going from March 1st through July 11th, and we can see that through the entire region we are not seeing any deficits. Most areas are normal to slightly above from March 1st through present. But going forward, looking at the April through present numbers, we can see that since April, some of those deficits for growing degree days, again, this is base 50, is showing up in parts of Nebraska, South Dakota, Iowa, and most of the region is just right at normal, with some pockets of above normal through Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, parts of Kansas, and even South and North Dakota. But for the majority of the region is right at normal to slightly above, with just a few pockets of below normal. So what does that mean? That means even with the delays and even some of the cooler than normal temperatures, especially if you remember what I'd showed over Indiana and Illinois, Ohio here for the calendar year, that has not impacted at least the accumulation of growing degree days. What's really going to be important is when did the producer get seed in the ground. That's going to be the real difference this year, and also what conditions was that seed impacted by, if there was any standing water or anything like that impacted development or progression of that crop. I think those are going to become more of an issue. And also the question came up, well, what has that smoke done that we've seen coming off the Canadian prairies? Has that impacted any of the potential growing degree days or crop development that we see in the region, which is crucial this time of year? And from the discussions that had went around, most of the state climatologists that I heard back from were saying that they were not seeing an impact, and even there had been some work done as far as looking at what this does mean for the diffused solar radiation coming in with response to the smoke. And for the most part, there was going to be little impact, if any, due to that smoke in the atmosphere. The quote that came off quite loud and clear to me was, "Don't jinx us," but the Minnesota State Climate Office was reporting how everything was agricultural-wise was good and even ahead of normal for this time of year, and everything was looking good. So again, they were seeing a lot of this smoke and not having issues. So really not a strong correlation between the smoke in the atmosphere and any detrimental developmental issues to crops in the region. And I wanted to show this slide even though it is outdated by about a month, and I could not find an updated version of it. But this was looking at the soybeans that were unplanted as of mid-June. And you can see that there was 12 million acres as of that time that was intended to be planted that had not been planted. But I think that this number has definitely declined, and again, I wish I had found an updated number for this, and I looked quite extensively for it, and there may be others out there that are more knowledgeable or maybe know state by state how these numbers are looking. But as at the middle of June, which was really about the last time we had a call here, there was quite a few acres unplanted for soybeans, and really that was from Kansas and Missouri into Iowa and Illinois were the main ones in our region, with anywhere from 500,000 to 1 million acres in the orange to greater than 1 million acres in the red of unplanted soybeans by the middle of June. And what does that mean? Well, there comes a certain point in time where even if you do plant a crop with as late as you're getting it into ground, the impact to yield is going to be so significant that some of these acres are not even going to go into seed because they're just not going to get a return on the investment of putting the seed in the ground and the inputs to get it there and harvested. So it will be interesting to see out of these 12 million what was the final acreage number of what was unplanted for soybeans. And corn for the same thing. Again, as you get past June 1st, for corn planting, it becomes more detrimental, especially for the northern climates. As you get further to the south, it's going to be risky depending on how quickly the freeze will come in the fall. And so we saw the majority of those unplanted acres again in Kansas and Missouri during this time. Most of the rest of the region was fine. Again, did not see an update past this one. It would have been great to just see what these numbers did on the final tally, and we can follow the USDA NASS reports to get a good idea of what that was as well. So looking at crop progress, this time of year for the corn crop, silking is the next main stage that we get to. And as we're seeing, most areas Looking at between the four columns of numbers, I'm looking at the far right one with the 2010-2014 average, the 5-year average, as well as the recent numbers for this week, the July 12th numbers. And we can see that we are progressing. Colorado's ahead of average, Illinois is ahead of average, Indiana's a little bit behind, Iowa as well. Kansas is right at average, Kentucky right at average, Michigan was behind, Minnesota was behind, Missouri right at average, Nebraska was right at average, a little bit below. North Dakota was below average, Ohio was a little bit below average, South Dakota and Wisconsin were a little bit below average as well. And again, some of that can be related to just how quickly the crop went into the ground this year and some of the delays, not only due to cool weather, but wetness during the main planting times. But for the most part, overall, the region is not doing too bad. And looking at soybeans, where the next stage is blooming before the pods start to set, we can see similar conditions. Illinois is a little bit below, Indiana likewise, Iowa right at normal, Kansas is slightly below normal, Kentucky below normal, Michigan's actually ahead of normal, Minnesota's ahead of normal, Missouri quite a bit behind, Nebraska is normal, North Dakota ahead of normal, Ohio a little bit ahead of normal, South Dakota a little bit behind, and Wisconsin quite a bit ahead. So you can see the more northern reaches of the region where they had better conditions for planting, we're seeing that crop progress a little bit more quickly than some of the areas through Illinois, Indiana, that we're fighting the wetness of getting that crop in the ground. That does not mean a crop does not have the ability to catch up, but it is something that we start to monitor. Again, we talked about the impact of smoke on the region, and I looked at the map for the lower 48 states, and there really was not too many incidences of fires taking place, only a handful in the northern Rockies and along the west coast of active fires taking place. But what really stood out for me was looking at the northern prairies of Canada and just the sheer number of significant fires greater than 2,500 hectares, and even up in Alaska. I know at one point in time at the beginning of July there was over 1 million acres on fire at once up in Alaska, and that's where that smoke's coming from. You have a tremendous number of acres on fire up to the north, and anytime we have a northerly fetch of the wind or a strong trough system digs in and we get that northwest flow, it's pulling down all this smoke, and it just shows you how dry it is up in some of the northern areas outside of the U.S. as well, that these fires. The impact, I think the impact for agriculture I've talked about already. There is going to be some impact to air quality. Anyone with any type of health issues may be seeing some problems associated with the smoke, but for the most part, that's really the only impact in our part of the country. So that takes us to the drought conditions for the country. What's nice to see is through much of the plains and Midwest, we see a lot of white. Again, those pockets of dryness that I had mentioned from Kansas to Iowa, northeast Nebraska, southeast South Dakota, eastern Dakotas, we're still seeing some lingering dryness, but really no impacts being reported up to this point in time. What we can see is as you get west of the Rocky Mountains, west of the Divide, there is significant drought still taking place, intensifying with some of the heat that they've had, and they've had a very dry start to their summer months as well. One thing to note, the fires in Alaska, we're actually showing some drought up in Alaska right now, and also on Puerto Rico. There's one of the signals associated with El Nino is that much of the northern Caribbean as well as South Florida starts to dry out, and again, the lack of tropical storms in the region. We're seeing quite a bit of drought on Puerto Rico and into South Florida right now, as well as the U.S. Virgin Islands. Looking at the statistics, currently we have right at 26% of the contiguous U.S. in drought. A year ago we were at 34%. So steadily have improved as time has progressed from last year to this year, especially in that area of the southern plains where drought has pretty much been eliminated. Even 3 months ago we were up over 37%. So quite quite a quick and big decline in the spatial extent of drought in the country. With that being said, there's still over 76 million people in the U.S. being impacted by drought based on the current U.S. Drought Monitor map and the latest census figures. So looking at the Northwest region, again, most of the drought is very isolated through this region. If you ignore what's going on in western parts of Montana, where we've rapidly seen drought developing here in the last month to 2 months, as a region, we are just 5.5% of the region in drought. 3 months ago, that was 27.5%. A year ago, 9.8%. So definitely a decrease in drought over the last 3 months from the beginning to the mid part of April. And we're just seeing a little bit of extreme drought in Montana. Everywhere else, just some moderate drought left in Nebraska, in northwest Kansas. And that's it right now as far as moderate drought outside of Montana. If we look at the Missouri River watershed, again, just almost 8% of the region is in drought, mainly up into Montana for those numbers. So looking at how the drought monitor has changed over the last month, so from the last call we had here to this week, we can see that rapid development in Montana and the Pacific Northwest, as we've seen with the greens and to the aqua colors in the Midwest and Plains, improvements especially in Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, Nebraska, South Dakota, Minnesota. And then a little bit of developing dryness from where we had drought in northwest Kansas, expanding even into parts of southern Nebraska and central Kansas with some abnormally dry conditions introduced here this week, as well as picking up that area in northwest Iowa this week as well. See the improvements in Wyoming and Colorado all the way down into New Mexico in response to just how wet it's been over the last several months in those regions is showing this improvement. Everywhere in gray, there's been no change. And so with that, we'll get into the outlooks. So for this, I'm going to go through the 7-day precipitation forecast, really looking at the short term, the 8 to 14-day outlooks, taking us to about the end of July. Then we'll go through what ENSO is showing, then the monthly and seasonal outlooks, and then I'll go through the autumn, winter, and spring outlooks, taking us all the way to May of 2016, ending with the seasonal drought outlook, and then some final bullet points of discussion before I'll take any questions. So over the next 7 days, the QPF is showing start off in the southwestern U.S. It looks like the monsoon season is really going to start pushing that moisture up from the south into the Four Corners region. Looks like Arizona is anticipated being the big winner over the next week of precipitation, but we are going to start seeing precipitation again from Colorado through Nebraska and Kansas into Iowa, Illinois. Looks like along the Iowa-Illinois border is the bullseye of the max precipitation potential of over 3 inches during this time. But outside of western South Dakota, western North Dakota, where amounts are anticipated to be fairly light, most of the rest of the region is anticipated over the next 7 days to pick up an inch of precipitation, if not more. And so that's favorable. Again, I talked about as the corn crop is reaching a key developmental stage as far as setting the yield with pollination, having ample moisture for those corn crops. And again, what have we seen with some of the precipitation through the region so far is it has helped to suppress temperatures as well. So that would be ideal conditions for crop development and progression, especially for the corn crop. Over the next 7 days. So quite ideal, typical summer pattern. Again, we'll have to really watch that southwestern monsoon and just see what kind of moisture fetch we can start bringing up from the southwest, especially into those areas of Colorado and Kansas, Nebraska, and Wyoming that the monsoon moisture can really impact. So over the next 8 to 14 days, we have temperature outlook on the right, precipitation outlook on, temperature on the left, precipitation on the right. And so with temperatures kind of going against what I just said, the 8 to 14 is showing temperatures being above normal potential for above normal temperatures during this time. And also, when you couple that with the precipitation, it does look like that after the next 7-day period, it is looking like potential for drier than normal conditions from the Ohio River Valley into the Midwest, even into the southern plains. So again, we'll have to see how that progresses. Warm temperatures definitely are seeing the greatest potential to our south, from Texas through the Gulf Coast states into Florida and the southeast. So hopefully we continue with at least seasonal types of conditions through the next 8 to 14 days. The precipitation outlook on the right-hand side is picking up the activeness of the monsoon in the southwest, and so again, we'll have to see how much that moisture plume will start making its way to the north and to the east out of that region, and how it may impact portions of the region going forward. So now we're talking about ENSO, and this is the latest update of the potential for ENSO strengthening going through next spring. So it's current through March, April, and May of next year. The solid yellow line is the dynamic average of all the models. We do have some outliers that didn't even fit on the upper range of the chart. But as you can see, all the models are showing readings above 0.5 degrees Celsius above normal in the ENSO region. And the average is currently we're about 1.25 degrees above normal Celsius in those regions, and it's showing that that's going to continue to intensify, peaking at about the October, November, December time frame at about 2 degrees above normal for the readings. And as you can see, if we do hit that 2 degrees Celsius departure above normal, that is right into the strong to very strong El Nino episodes, and there's only been a handful of those ever recorded. So again, we would like to continue to see the El Nino strengthening, especially for the drought issues on the West Coast. This could hopefully mean some relief to those folks. But it also needs to develop. We have had several ENSO events over the last decade that, even though we'd seen the conditions, the signal that we typically associate with those events does not take place. So right now the forecast is showing us at a moderate El Nino strengthening to a strong to very strong El Nino event by the end of fall, first part of winter. So we will see that continuing, hopefully. It sounds like, if I remember right, I was doing this call about a year ago this time, and I think we were talking about quite the same type of situation. And hopefully this time it does come to fruition with the forecast. And as you can see, the probability is continuing, almost 100% probability of this development continuing through the first part of 2016, with just a slight change in that probability as we get into February, March, and April of next year. So the monthly and seasonal outlooks. The first panel is showing what we're anticipating for August, and then August, September, October on the bottom half of the panel. And so with temperatures, what we're seeing is a definite signal associated with a strong monsoon season being anticipated. So if you look at the probabilities of seeing above normal precipitation, that starts out in the southwest and continues into the central Rockies, out onto the plains, even catching part of the Midwest, and that's also associated with temperatures being below normal. What catches my eye on that, as well as the August through October panels below for temperature, is if we're already seeing some of these delays, especially in the soybean crop due to late planting. What does this mean going forward if we're seeing below normal temperatures? The probability of seeing those are really highlighted in the August through October panel. And that's going to be something to really watch going forward to see if there's going to be impact to the crops due to that reduced temperature probability. Along with that, though, it looks to maintain fairly wet conditions, especially through the central plains through the Midwest. Some of the more northerly areas are more equal chances of above or below, but as you go further to the south, we're seeing that we have above normal chances of above normal precipitation. Again, we should not be dealing with any type of drought development issues in these regions through the rest of this growing season. So that's something to watch. So looking at autumn, this is September, October, November. Again, the temperature probabilities on the left, the precipitation probabilities on the right, and we're still seeing that signal of the higher than normal probabilities of below normal precipitation, below normal temperatures through much of the southern plains and into portions of the Midwest, as we have September, October, November slated here, with the warm temperatures continuing to be an issue on the West Coast. And it does continue that wetter than normal signal. The higher probabilities are all the way from the Four Corners again through much of the central to southern plains, as well as catching portions of the Midwest. So we'll be watching that as well. It would really be problematic to have delays on both the front and back end of the growing season for some of these producers, as that has been a problem in some of the years past. Looking at the winter, again, this is about 5 months out, looking at December, January, February. What we are seeing is through the winter months for temperature on the left, precipitation on the right, we're seeing that those warmer than normal temperature probabilities stay in place from the Pacific Northwest through the northern plains, and the below normal temperature probabilities from the southern plains through the southeast continue as well. The precipitation signal, it looks to stay fairly bullish from above normal probabilities of above normal precipitation for the winter through much of California into the southwest and the southern states, even into the southeast and Gulf Coast states up the eastern seaboard. But there are a couple bullets there of below normal precipitation probabilities through the Ohio River Valley into the Great Lakes, and also in the northern Rocky Mountains. We'll have to really see what develops. Again, these are very long lead at this point, and again, it's really the skill associated with these will definitely increase if we see that El Nino continue to develop and the signal associated with El Nino stays the way we typically see this time of year. So looking at the spring outlook, so almost 7.5 months out. So this is March, April, May. For temperatures, the warm signal across the northern tier of the U.S. Continues, and the cooler than normal temperature probabilities continue through the southern plains, especially over Texas and Oklahoma. And the precipitation signal, there's a below normal probability of precipitation chances up in the northern Great Lakes region, and above normal probabilities of above normal precipitation across the Four Corners into the southern Rockies and southern Plains region. So again, this is quite a ways out, but something to at least discuss and follow as we move forward. And as I've mentioned, the seasonal drought outlook is not looking like any drought is anticipated to develop at all through the grain belt, through the central, southern portions of the country, even into the Midwest, Mid-Atlantic, and New England. The areas in green, drought is likely to be removed during this time. So again, Arizona is showing a direct correlation with the anticipated strong monsoon season that has already started to begin, with most of the drought removed or improving through that region. Anticipated further development of drought up into portions of central Montana, but again, we're looking fairly good through our region of the country, and especially those areas to the south of us as well. So in summary, what we can say is most of the region has been cooler than normal and wetter than normal over the last month. Again, I identified various pockets where this has not been the case, and the further west you go in the region, it has been warmer. But for the most part, this has been over the last month, and even for the calendar year, that has been the case. Quiet fire season so far in the lower 48, not so much to the north. Again, very active through portions of Canada and into Alaska. As we progress through summer, I'm anticipating, with just the dryness that we have seen along the western U.S. into the Pacific Northwest, along with the high temperatures, we will probably see fire danger increasing and more active going forward. Drought is not an issue over the region, nor is it anticipated to develop this summer. Those are good words to hear. Hopefully we're not battling any issues on the developmental side of the agricultural crops. El Nino will continue to intensify, maybe becoming a strong El Nino over the next 3 months. Again, we may even hit that very strong threshold by the end of November, first part of the winter. But yeah, again, we need to continue to see that development taking place, the intensification, and we also need to see El Nino behave like an El Nino. So with that being said, some of this is just going to have to be wait and see. So again, some information on where you can go for these data, some of these products, where the presentations are being recorded are available on this slide. And for all the people involved in this call, again, I'm not going to name everyone, but if you have questions at this time, you can unmute your line with *6, and I will take questions, and thank you for your attention and time.
Thank you, Brian. And let's go ahead and take our first question, and *6 to unmute your line. And if you could please say your name and who you're with. Thank you. Also, just a reminder too, our panelists today that are on the line are Dennis Toddy from South Dakota State University, Doug Cluck with NCEI, with NOAA, and Kevin Stamm from U.S. Corps of Engineers. And I believe a couple other people are on the line too, Natalie Umflett, and who's from the High Plains Regional Climate Center, and Mike Timlin. I believe I saw him on there briefly. Yep, he's still there, and he's from the Midwestern Regional Climate Center.
And just as we have a moment here, I know here at the National Drought Mitigation Center and the High Plains Climate Center, this week we had some visitors from the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming that had come up for some training between our two centers. So I know they were listening in on the call today, and they're very interested in putting together climate summaries and learning about how some of these processes work. So just welcoming them to the audience this afternoon.
Okay.
Hi, this is Keith Puntany. I'm in Iowa. I'm wondering if you guys have any estimates on what the weather long-term into fall will do to the USDA crop forecast for beans and corn.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know when the first official projections come out. I think we are fairly close to the first one for corn, and I think beans comes out shortly after that. Again, it's really going to be something that depending on the producer and where they were in proximity to the heavy rains, I think even within counties you could see big differences between crop development just based on when that crop was put in or what kind of delays were taking place. I don't think we're going to see any delays in development due to the lack of accumulating growing degree units. So it's really going to be issues related to when that crop went in the ground. So what does that mean for the estimates? I'm guessing that for the year, the corn estimates are going to be about where they were expected as far as acres planted and as far as yield. I don't see any impact to that. I think acres planted for beans could be reduced and probably going to see the overall average yield for the country decline slightly, and again, very slightly, due to some of the developmental delays in planting.
I've got a follow-up question.
Yes.
We're starting to see a lot of disease in corn especially, and wondering if this repetition of heat and cold and wet weather isn't going to affect the crop because of some diseases that are now showing up in larger numbers for the corn plant.
Yeah, I would say you're spot on with your observations that the pattern that we've been in with the wet, cool, and heat oscillating back and forth, you are going to start seeing disease issues, and it's not only going to be isolated to corn. We've heard about some of this with winter wheat that's almost done with harvest, and again with years where you have the type of situation where we've seen with ample moisture, not a lot of heat all at once, and pockets of these hot weeks and cool weeks. I think that sets the stage quite well for disease development. Again, producers are going to have to look and see what can be done based on the type of disease and what they feel is the best and most cost-effective method of dealing with those diseases as far as chemical applications. But I do think you're right. We're probably going to see more of that this year than we would in a typical year.
Okay, one other quick follow-up. One of the things that's happening out here in Iowa is the corn has grown to 5 and 6 foot tall, which means that it's not going to be possible to go in with overhead spray like we've done in the past at this point in the growing season. So one of the issues I think we've got out here is there's going to be a requirement to do a lot more aerial spraying, and we're fairly limited in terms of our ability to cover large numbers of acres that way.
Sure.
That's kind of a follow-up to what we've been talking about. I was just talking to my tenant about this very issue, and I think that the $20 to $30 an acre cost, given the prices of corn out here, right now, I'm talking about the current prices of corn, is going to create some issues between farmers trying to decide whether it's really economically worthwhile, and also it's going to be hard to go in and catch the disease without going deep into your fields in some cases.
So you're saying if I have a crop dusting business, I could head to Iowa and have a good year right now?
You would be a millionaire. I would think you would be surprised how many people are going to be demanding crop dusting, and that's already started out here in the central part of Iowa.
What kind of corn diseases are you seeing already?
Leaf spot and you name it. It's starting out here.
A lot of everything.
Yes, you name it.
Well, that'll be something to really follow and see what the potential impact to yield will be and how widespread it becomes.
If you go up to the Iowa State website, the extension website, they're starting to report the disease problem, all over Iowa right now. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments.
Do we have any other questions for Brian or anyone else on our panel?
I have a question. This is Benjamin Diamond from the Toa Reinsurance Company. And I have a question about the drought situation in Canada. I know you talked about the wildfires. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering, what is the outlook looking like for Canada, for Alberta in particular?
There is a drought product that we work on, and it's the North American Drought Monitor, and it's a monthly product, and it's going to be released here yet this week, showing the drought conditions for the Canadian prairies. And the group up in Canada that puts that out is Agri-Food Canada, and I do have a point of contact with them if you would like. I know he's out of the office this week, returning next week. If you'd like to contact me offline, I can put you in touch with them. I think they would be better suited to speak on the Canadian conditions, but if you Google North American Drought Monitor, you can at least get a map of what the current status looks like. It's a monthly product, and again, it will be released if not today, it'll be tomorrow.
Okay. Sure. Thanks.
We still have a few minutes if you have any last-minute questions. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us today for the monthly Central U.S. Climate Outlook. We would like to extend an invitation to join us on our next webinar, and that'll be at 1 p.m. Central on August 20th. Till then, for Brian and all our panelists today, have a good day. Bye-bye.